necessarily, other than to maybe have it as an appendix. All right. And I guess the final question is whether or not we could get a report that provides us with the 2014 revenue projections on a monthly basis, so we can compare whether or not we are tracking towards the original budget expectations versus where we might be falling off. So when we see the actuals, we'll know the difference between our projections and our actuals.
We could do that. We do it internally in the finance department in the sense that we compare where we are in a particular year to what took place in the immediately preceding year.
Okay.
Okay, and so we track how we do it up and down on a monthly basis.
So we can have that.
It's going to be, again, a big spreadsheet. We'll take a look at, how telling that might be, because all of this is trend analysis. If you just look at 1 year last year and you compare it to where you are now, that's not necessarily the most accurate. You want to do sort of an analysis of the trends of 2 or 3 prior years. Okay? But we look back month to month based on what happened in prior years.
No, let me ask it a different way then. I'm assuming that the revenue expectations that we've set.
Hit your mic, Ted.
The revenue expectations that we've set that produced our budget is based on an expectation that we're going to be receiving revenues on a monthly basis.
That's correct.
And I'm asking whether or not we, rather than having all of the details, the same way we have the report now would essentially be an extra column that says monthly revenue projection or revenue projection for that month. Not a lot of detail, just the number that we projected in revenue for that month, for all 12 months.
If you go to the third page in on your report, okay, the phrase, you could take it off of this, it's called an academia curvilinear analysis, okay? But you could, off of these projected trend lines, you could just sort of go over to the vertical axis and you could go boom, and you can see where we project we should be relative to these 2 major sources, local and state sources of revenue.
Right. So you can provide those numbers.
We should be able to do that. It would just be quantifying these trend lines.
Okay. That would be good.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. McMahon.
And then John. Dr. Bell, you mentioned just a few moments ago about TANs. Could you tell me when we approved the TANs for our shortfall in expected revenue a couple of months ago? When and where will that hit on the balance sheet? Have we received our TAN revenue?
Yes, sir.
Right. And does that fall into a revenue category for us?
Not specifically, because as you know, you have to pay it back before the end of a calendar year in Georgia. The TAN money, the $70+ million we got, we're going to pay back on the 16th of December.
No, I'm with you. And I think it's a little bit confusing for the board here,
right,
to not realize that the difference in the income, revenue, and the disbursements is actually we have money set aside for 2-3 months worth of shortfalls on revenue to get us through that time.
That's correct.
So I think.
But if you show the TAN revenue as revenue received, then you got to show the notes payable that sets it off. Okay.
Fair enough.
So it's going to wash. It's going to wash. The only incremental difference will be the interest cost of the TANs will be a slight cost to the system, but then you got the TAN money invested, which ought to pretty well take out the interest cost of the TANs.
So from my perception, or what I would like, and I'll ask the board for their input, is can we see our revenue, even though we're going to pay it back, is it possible that in future reports that we can see the TANs? Is it in a segregated account? Is it sitting in general operating account? And that's the purpose of it is to pay these revenue shortfalls.
It's a cash flow note that helps us get through the.
Right.
It's not a revenue shortfall. It's a timing mismatch.
Completely understand. Yeah. So And we understand that our goal for future years
Right.
is that we will be healthy enough financially not to rely on TANs and have the reserves in place to get us through those lean months.
Well, let me just say, in general governments that are on calendar year budgets, I've seen that happen and have done it. But because we're a mid-year budget, operation is going to be pretty tough for us ever to get to a point that we don't have to do a TAN issuance unless we find an additional source of revenue.
So in your financial report, is there any place that shows our TAN receipts?
I don't think there is at this point.
All right.
In the
And I think, yeah.
financial statements will show it, but not in the monthly financial report.
Okay. Thank you.
John?
I had a quick question about the vendor report because I wanted to make sure I understood this too. I had read that as a timing mismatch, so I assumed this vendor report was a snapshot current, whereas the income statement was a July income statement. Is that a fair, because I noticed it's $32 million, I think, in vendor spend on the vendor report. Is it fair to say this is probably an end of August snapshot or a current snapshot of vendor report, and that would be the mismatch with our expenses?
It says FY14 vendor spend. I'll have to check and see exactly, what the end date on it is. But this was produced at the end of August. I think you're correct.
Okay. It might be good to get a timestamp on these just so we know the mismatch.
Yes, sir.
Further discussion or questions? Hearing none, is there any opposition to placing this item on the consent agenda? It will be on the consent agenda.